Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to the second episode of Dan Milano Responses. Today we're jumping right back in to Season 1, Episode 6 responses for a very special reason. But first, how did this get started? As you know, I really got into the show glitch texts, and I was thrilled when I was contacted by one of the co-creators, Dan Milano. And it turns out he's a very interactive creator, and interacting not only with my videos that I posted about it, but the comments that my viewers left on the videos. So, for Season 1, Episode 6, to give a little backstory, this was a classic episode. It was called Alpha Leader. It was where the hero is humbled for his hubris. It is where the hero is humbled. And this particular storyline is one that causes me a bit of emotional distress whenever I come across it, because I get a very empathetic feeling with the character. And Dan Milano and I discussed that. And another viewer commented, Betty Adams. The thing is, Five knows how much of an ass Mitch is. So seeing him act like a Mitch for most of the episode is really unlikable. I know this episode focuses on him being a leader and needs to overcome an obstacle to know what a good leader is, but rather than being something more natural like inexperience or him being overly protective of his teammates in favor of them progressing towards the offensive on the glitch, the reason is that Mitch, someone who's been a constant bother to him and Me-K.O, told him Hanish and Zara respond well to a tough guy. And Milano responded to Cat Fox with this. After Cat Fox said, sorry if the explanation's a bit wordy. Wordy is what we do. Fair point. When the show was conceived, Five was going to look up to Mitch a bit more, awed by his powers as a gamer and a tech. As we wrote episodes and fleshed out the characters, this got less plausible given Mitch's overt behavior, particularly in the pilot. We hoped that Five's insecurity made him impressionable, and that despite having seen some or Mitch's true colors, his perception of Mitch as a skilled and experienced leader is still to be admired. You will see much more of this dynamic in the coming shows. Lastly, the show's tone is always a factor. We go for a more genuine reality, but still being a cartoon for all ages, it helps when we can find heightened visual ways to depict the story, especially for younger viewers. So while a stretch, Five adopting a literal imitation of Mitch down to the hair and style was our admitted exaggeration. Not only is it comedic, it allows Me-K.O an immediate reaction. It tells the audience that Five has literally changed. We use a preschool tactic on our show that tries to convey the story in such a way that if you watch the show with the sound off, you could still understand the plot. For all our sophistication and constant dialogue, the hope is that none is truly needed. This helps us rely on cinema and makes the stories hopefully accessible to not just the very young, but older non-gamer audiences as well. And that wraps up the Season 1 Episode 6 reply. And moving on to the Season 1 Episode 8 reply, I just really enjoyed this episode. It was called Adventures in Pet Training. It was a classic boy and his robot story, and I just gushed about this episode. I really enjoyed it, especially because on the surface it was a very simple boy and his robot story. But underneath, it was a very deep dive into a very, very old story, what was lurking in the underworld. And Milano replied to my gushing with an amusing little response, hehe, it's my favorite too. So again, word of creator, Glitch Tech Season 1, Episode 8, Adventures in Pet Training, is the co-creator's Dan Milano's favorite episode. Now, after this, I posted a general review video about the entire series. The title of my video was Fives Hasn't Done Anything Yet, The Curious Case of the Reluctant and Passive Hero of Glitch Techs. After I had watched the show several times, I noticed something odd. Even though Fives and Me-K.O are basically co-main characters, I kind of focused on Five at this point, and from my analysis of what had happened, Fives had never initiated any of his own adventures. He had always been responding to life, to the point that he didn't tell his grandparents about the Hanobi competition. And I detailed this in a video, how interesting it was and how strange it was for a main character to be so passive. And Dan Milano responded with a beautifully long reply, so let's get into it. Dan Milano says, I always tell my writers that all choices made or not made by the characters must be what drive the stories. Things need to happen as a direct result of who our characters are, what they do, what they fail to do, all based on their motivation and outlook. I also find it very common that more people in real life tend to observe before acting, especially in group situations where someone is always the first to act and others tend to follow suit. Me-K.O was clearly the more traditionally active lead. It was a challenge to find situations or motivations that gave her pause. Fives was, by more contrast, meant to be a hero for those kids who cannot identify with being the first to act. The challenge of the show was to hopefully create intimacy with the audience and suspend their disbelief in our crazy ideas by giving them something a bit more grounded and relatable than is typical in animation, particularly kids' animation. In some way, those of us who related to him also brought a little of ourselves. For me personally, who has always been seen as rather outgoing and personable, I have had a deep-rooted shyness. Pretty much any good decision I ever made in my life, including taking an overall deal at Nickelodeon, was with the encouragement of my friends, loved ones, and business associates. Some kids just need to see others dive into the pool before they put a toe in. I don't know if that is a shortcoming. It is all based on the perspective, of course, but we always found Five to be very active in terms of helping drive the story, at least in regard to who he is. There could be no alpha leader if Five did not decide to take Mitch's advice, and it is likely Gabriel never would have emerged if Five did not actively search for Nobi Grossout and insist to Me-K.O that they play it. In Castlestein, he could have waited for Me-K.O to recover from her realization that she has never finished the game, but instead he attempts to pep talk her, which prompts a discovery about the sword she holds as the key to moving forward. In Collection Quest, Five poses to Bergie that they quest together, and his obsession with collecting gems to buy his shoes leads to complications. Perhaps this is deceptive in the sense that these actions are reactions to other factors and motivations, but for me it is just a more well-rounded view of a real-life hero. I also kind of consider that Five and Me-K.O to be very much two sides of one character, but that's another matter. Anyway, as usual, this analysis is fascinating and I'm just offering my perspective. This gave me a lot to think about and you'll be pleased with the 10 new stories coming your way soon. So that was Dan Milano's very well thought out and deep response to my analysis, for which I'm very grateful. So I replied, I have to say I just adore how well Me-K.O and Fives work together. They actually remind me a lot of my own relationship with my best friend growing up. If it hadn't been for her, I would have spent most of my childhood lost in my own head. I think what really made me recognize this aspect of the show was how much I related to Fives in this. I had a near paralyzing level of overthinking, added to social anxiety, that made me one of those very reactionary kids, to the point that my grandparents commented on it. I think having one of us turn out with the think before you leap gene was somewhat comforting to them. As I got older, I tried to compensate for this hesitancy by mimicking my more naturally assertive friends, much like Fives did with Mitch, to rather disastrous results for everyone involved. And I suddenly have an all-new perspective on why that episode hit me so hard. I agree it is more true to real life and very relatable. It kind of makes me wonder why the character type isn't used more often in modern fiction. Now that I am looking for it, I can find plentiful examples in the novels of past centuries. To be fair to the argument, every action, no matter how spontaneous in appearance, is merely the result of the actions of previous people in previous generations. To draw that reaction versus action line, we would literally have to apply quantitative math to utterly qualitative aspects of human nature. Five just shades far enough into the reactive side of the equation that it set my author senses tingling. So, Milano replies to that, Betty Adams, I can tell you that it wasn't too difficult for us to create a character dynamics like these, but it was something that came entirely from us and our consultants, and we had to be very cautious in altering the traditional models. All studios want positive, active role models. There's also a leaning towards strong boys, physically and in terms of bravery, and thankfully that is now extending to girls as well, but strength and power usually come in traditionally boyish form. To make Five sensitive and cautious, and to balance femininity and brazen power for Me-K.O, we had to get to the root of the established norms as much as possible to understand studio concerns. Typically, you can boil them down to rigid rules for very general desire to have the characters be likable and relatable to the majority of age demographics. Thankfully, we had a supportive regime at the top of our development who always allowed us to show rather than just tell when we had theories on how to depict our characters. We were able to test animatics with actual kid test audience to prove that the kids enjoyed and related to seeing kids more like them and less like stone-faced heroes who leap into danger without thinking, who hug and embrace and communicate openly. In earlier stages, Five used to whimper a bit more and was subject to pratfalls. This was more traditional physical comedy that Nick was used to, and as a lanky character, Five was fun to play with in this way. But we scaled back a great deal so as not to make him weak or inferior to Me-K.O, but strong in his own way. That way may not always be as physical, but it needn't be a Jerry Lewis routine. Anyway, Five was seeming like a cartoon next to Me-K.O, who felt more like a real person. Making them equals in every sense was a strong mandate. We also tried to explain to people supposedly much smarter than us what true bravery means. I'd experienced this at my daughter's school, where teachers and guest parents would tell kids that bravery is not being scared, when that is, of course, the opposite of brave. Kids in testing literally called out moments where Five was scared but did something anyway as real, which I was so thankful for. They can't invest in heroes that just dive into danger with a quip. We used to recall how Harrison Ford would allow Indiana Jones human reactions to things before leaping into the fray. Indy could be overwhelmed, tired, exhausted, hurt, etc. No wonder the character was more popular and timeless than any Schwarzenegger hero of the 80s. Anyway, I think the model is starting to change. We're seeing shows like She-Ra and Kippo and Infinity Train, and plenty of others seem to want to entertain kids while also creating more relatable role models. On a quick side note, for those of you who may not be as up on past American culture, Dan Milano referenced Jerry Lewis and wanting Fives to be less like a Jerry Lewis skit. Jerry Lewis was nicknamed the King of Comedy and was an American comedian, actor, singer, filmmaker, and humanitarian who appeared in over 60 films and other media, from the Martin and Lewis partnership with singer Dean Martin to his one-man solo act. So, Jerry Lewis was basically a slapstick comedian who'd just get up on the stage, do a bunch of pratfalls, and he did them very, very well. So, that's who Jerry Lewis is. Alright, so that is the reactions to my Glitch Tech videos from Dan Milano. That wraps up Season 1. Next Sunday, we'll hopefully get into Season 2. And thank you for listening. Check out the links in the description to get a copy of Humans Are Weird. I have the data, which do try to have very balanced heroes, but I am afraid I do delve into a lot of pratfalls. So, peace out, my wonderful viewers.
The book from author Betty Adams, Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, is a humorous look at human behavior through the eyes of aliens. This book is arranged in separate reports or essays, documenting the experiences with humanity through the lens of the aliens who have to interact with them. This anthology of short stories and vignettes from alien points of view highlights some of humanity's quirks we can all relate to. Author Betty Adams captures how strange and interesting humans can really be. This is a fun collection of stories you will really get a kick out of. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, from author Betty Adams. Order your copy right now on Amazon.